Good morning, everybody. Welcome to FSU Coach Live. My name is Tim Backhurst, and this morning's guest is Christian DeVries from Paradise. I had a moment there where my mind just went blank. Christian, Paradise Valley Community College. He's the head coach of men's and women's soccer. Thank you so much for joining me. I apologize. It's Friday morning. My brain is clearly not engaged. So I'm going to let you take over and tell us a little bit about who you are, where you've come from, and what you're doing, because I know you have some multiple roles.
Well, first of all, Tim, thank you for the invite to the show. I'm excited to be here. I've kind of been following what you've been doing for close to a year, and then really when the pandemic hit and you really took off with some of your interviews. Listening to the interviews you've had with people, just because I'm always an active learner. I think coaches need to be active learners, and to just hear from other coaches to other people and what they're doing within our industry, I think it's just fantastic what you're bringing to the table.
Thank you.
Just a little bit about myself. I'm kind of a career coach, a career learner. This year I'm starting my 25th year coaching at the college level. I will say a majority of my career was at four-year institutions, whether it was NCAA Division II, NCAA Division III, or NAI institutions, and now I'm actually on the tail end of my career as the coordinator of soccer and the head men's and women's soccer coach for Paradise Valley Community College in Phoenix, Arizona. I've been in this role now. I started out as just a men's coach, and then I took on the women's team coming into this new year. So I'll be involved with both teams and really building a staff that's going to be working with me at Paradise Valley. So my career is kind of an interesting track, because I would say I didn't take the normal track that most college coaches would take, that you would see that most college coaches would take. I was not a, quote, blue chip athlete per se, especially even in the world of soccer when I was in college. I attended Adams State College. I initially went there and ran cross country for Coach Vigil, who is probably one of the most well-known distance coaches in the entire world. And I spent a year running for Coach Vigil at Adams State, and I learned a lot about that. But at that time, I also went back to playing soccer, which was my passion. And so I kind of did both, and I helped start the club program at Adams State. Upon graduating with my bachelor's degree, I stayed at Adams State and started my master's degree, and then I was the NCAA compliance coordinator. So I got involved in athletics, early on as the NCAA compliance coordinator, but I was still involved in coaching, and I really loved coaching and loved the sport. And I saw a job pop up at a small NAI school in Missouri in July of July of '96, I believe it was. I applied for this job at, no, actually, I'm sorry, it was 93. So 93, 94, I applied for this job at Missouri Valley College, and it was for a head coaching job. And understand, I have not done any, quote, formal real coaching except for working with a club team and some youth soccer. I got the job at Missouri Valley College because I had just graduated with my graduate degree in counseling, and the coach that left was teaching psychology and human relationships courses. I was the candidate that can come in and teach the courses they needed, as well as coach. So, the point was that I had a master's degree, which I think is, still an important piece. And I got that job. So I was cutting my teeth at the age of 23 as the head coach of a women's soccer team. And I coached at Missouri Valley for a couple of years. Then I went back to Colorado, and then I ended up at the University of Minnesota Morris, where I was very fortunate to start the women's program from scratch. So I started a Division II women's program at the University of Minnesota Morris. I coached them for 8.5 years before we made the transition to Division III, and then we added men's soccer, and the administration asked me to step down as a women's coach and start the men's program. So in my career, I've actually started 2 intercollegiate soccer programs from scratch, from the bottom up, and been involved in developing both of those programs at the University of Minnesota Morris. I then took a stint at moving south to get out of the cold, went to Spring Hill College, where I was at a private Jesuit Catholic college and Spring Hill College for about 5 years. And then After about 5 years there, I actually stepped away from the game for a little while because my wife had just taken a job that was very lucrative, and she was really focused on that. And it was a time when my kids were at an age that I wanted to spend some more time with my kids. So as they were growing up, and so I started my own business, and where I focused on sports leadership, and really wanting to talk about how leadership is so important to sports. And spent a few years doing that before I got back into the college coaching. So now I am the college coach at Paradise Valley Community College, and I also run a program called AOS, the Athlete of Significance, where I work with coaches, high school athletes, and parents on understanding how important significance is in their journey of being an athlete, and use sports leadership and recruiting education to empower athletes to become a better version of themselves through the athletic experience.
So lots of opportunities for questions in that. And I'm going to start with looking at being a coach in a community college versus a coach in a four-year college, because you've done both. I'm curious some of maybe the challenges and differences associated with those two, because some people may just assume coach adults, students, it's the same thing. But I have a suspicion that that's an incorrect assumption.
Well, I mean, it's a great question, and yes, there are some major differences, and there are some challenges, and I think when you're actually trying to dissect that for you as your own, what your journey is going to be as you start into trying to understand where you want to go from coaching, you need to understand that. And I'll talk about this in just a second. When we talk about the differences, I want to preface what the differences are. Is I'm basing it off the why and the where. The why and the where in terms of where you're coaching. So, first of all, it's why are you coaching? What is your passion for coaching? What are you trying to do as a coach? And then where are you actually doing that coaching? So that's where things come in. The big difference between the say a junior college or the community college route and being at the four-year program is the time you have with your athletes. 2 years is a quick turnaround. When you're used to being with athletes for 4 years, you're used to being part of their development and watching their development. And really, it's almost 5 years, because when you talk about when you start the recruiting process and you start developing relationships with them as recruits, and then they come in and play for you, and then you've seen them mature and matriculate up to being a senior, and they graduate, and then you still have friendships with them. That process that you have with them is fantastic. At the 2-year college, it's quick. 2 years goes fast. You just really start to get to know your athlete in that 2-year process, and you're moving them on to a new experience. So that I think that's the big difference. And then when it relates to recruiting, the recruiting cycle is very different. Where my recruiting cycle at a 4-year school sometimes might be a 2 to 3 year cycle to eventually having a kid sign with us, my recruiting cycle at the junior college might be less than 18 months to a year. And sometimes it's even less than a year, because you got to understand, athletes have a preconceived notion, parents have a preconceived notion that community college is not for them. They need to have the 4-year experience. Right. 4-year program is better. There's all sorts of preconceived notions about it. So the junior college is often the last option they might be looking at, and not necessarily considered as one of the first options they should be exploring when they're exploring everything else. So my job as a coach is, how do you position yourself and your program as we are a viable option for you earlier in the recruiting process than not. So that's the big difference. I think that difference ties into one of the challenges I just shared with you. And that challenge is preconceived notions of what junior college is, what community college is, and how it relates in the grand scheme of Division I, Division II, Division III. What level of the soccer type of soccer is it? And so, well, I don't want to go to a junior college. That would be beneath me. We've been preparing our son or daughter for this 4-year experience, and that's where they need to go. But you have to understand, it's number one. I think when kids need to be looking at, is it an athletic fit? Is it a financial fit? And is it an academic fit? And so often we don't, when we're looking at those, we are not necessarily looking at the junior college as an option. So there's always that challenge in educating, how do we fit into those three areas. I even look at, like, I call them recruiting services. I go to college panels, I go to college talks. There's so often, I am one of the few junior colleges on a panel, and I get on those panels not because I'm a junior college. I get on those panels because of my experience that I've had for the previous 25 years, that people know me from my 4-year experiences. And so that I'm on the panel because of who I am, not because of where I coach. But now I can start to speak into the junior college discussions. I look at some of these programs out there, nobody ever addresses community college as a viable option. Funny thing is, now with the pandemic, I'm seeing a slight change because people don't have the financial piece to attend the 4-year schools that they might have considered in the past. So now we've become an option for them as we look at it. I do think the other challenge we have is, excuse me, one of the other challenges that I face is we're not funded at the same level as I was at a 4-year school. Even on my staff, I'm the only full-time person at the institution, and I'm coaching both. I'm the head coach for both of the programs, so I'm overseeing both programs, but my entire assistant coaching staff are part-time coaches. Even within our own conference that we're in, over half the coaches are just part-time coaches. So, when you're dealing with that, it's an area sometimes where you cut your teeth. A lot of people think that maybe that's where I can start. I love the fact I'm on the tail end of my career at the junior college. But it's also a great place for people to start, because it might be you get an inroad on maybe that part-time, but resources are very different. I do understand resources are different at 4-year schools. I've been at the 4-year where there's a difference between resources, but there can be some major differences between how a junior college here is funding versus one down here. And how do you position yourself? So that goes back to my point of why you coach. And when you understand why you coach, it makes it a lot easier for you to deal with the challenges that you have.
Let me go back to the differences between community college and 4-year, because you provided a really good kind of overview of that. But I think a lot of people have some misassumptions, and you touched on that. If we watch, I don't know, a Last Chance U, for example, on Netflix, we see these athletes, they're going to JUCO because they have to. I just need to get up my grades, or I need to get a look at a 4-year college. And it's always, I go to JUCO to get out rather than I'm intentionally going. And you have the challenge in recruiting of finding people who don't just want to come in and get out, because we've seen it's a show, but we've seen in that show that the teams can be highly dysfunctional because everybody's out for themselves rather than a team. So how do you build a team of individuals who say, this is where I am, I'm going to work for my teammate, rather than, hey, I'm going to use this community college opportunity for 2 years to get my scholarship at university of whatever?
Absolutely a great question, Tim, because that is what you're talking about is you're talking about culture. Right.
Exactly.
And when we're talking about culture, when I first arrived at Paradise Valley, I mean, the men's culture was a chance for me to play soccer maybe for a little bit longer. Right. I don't want to go to college. I have no desire to go to college, but I'm going to go play at a junior college where it's in the fall. I'll enroll in 12 hours. I won't go to class, but I'll play soccer. Well, that's part of the culture that was there, and sometimes that's when you have part-time coaches, how much are they invested in changing the culture, or is that experience for them to get me to the next level and what that might look like? I was at the tail. I want to say I'm not at the tail end of my career. I have had a lot of experience in my career that when I ended up where I was at, my focus was on just pouring into the kids and creating the best possible experience I could for the kids. And it wasn't as much about my growth and my journey as it was about what I was trying to do for my kids. And so that's part of what that culture is. Yes. And I think that, Last Chance U, I love the stories. I've watched them. But there is, that's a football world, that's a football culture.
Sure.
And that is definitely, that's part of that junior college world within football. This is your last chance. I mean,
Yeah.
think about what they're saying there. I think when we're talking about it, I have some kids that, they didn't make it at the four-year school and they're coming back, and we're trying to get them eligible to go back to a four-year school. I'm recruiting a young lady right now that we're helping her, or we're guiding her. I'm not helping her, I'm guiding her to getting her GED so we can get her into school, so then she can play. With ultimately, my goal is to get her a 2-year degree. So, we have to understand that's part of our clientele and who we're working with and our challenges. We have some kids that they've never thought that college was an option for them. They weren't great students in high school. They didn't think about that college. So it goes back to, how do you create that culture? What I have done specifically for myself at where I'm at, and this is a challenge that I do this at every school I'm at, but I've made it very clear what are my core values going to be for my institution. And this goes back to what I said before. It's not only why you're coaching, what is your why, but where are you coaching? I realize I'm at a community college. I'm at a community college that I do have a large portion of first generation Hispanic students that are going to be looking at our institution. So what were the core values that were going to be important for me in the recruiting process, to making sure that the athletes were aware of the program they were coming into? So we wrote out our core values, and we based it off of our mascot, that our number one core value is just a pathway to progress for Pumas. You're coming to our institution fully understanding that it is a pathway for progress to you to get to a next level, whatever that next level might be. You're going to be united in what we do. So you're coming to a program that is focused on we and not me. We are going to be men of integrity, and that we need to understand what it means to have integrity, and we're going to do what we say and say what we do. We're going to be accountable to each other and really look out for each other. And then finally, we're going to be servant leaders. When I implemented that culture of core values and I started talking to my recruits, what happened is I ended up having players that were realizing that's what I want to be part of. And once I know I'm part of that, it started to change what was happening for what we were doing within the programs. That I now have players that, my roster's pushing 25 to 30 guys on a regular basis, because we have a culture that players are like, that's what I desire. I think part of people, I really believe in this as a coach. Until you're aware of something, you're not really, you're not open to the opportunities that are available to you. So I think a lot of young kids, they're not aware of what a college experience can be for them. And until they became aware of this is what this program can be, did they buy into that? I think the other change that I made, again, and this is because I was very in tune with where I was recruiting and dealing with a lot of first generation Hispanic students, mom and dad had to be part of the recruiting process, especially for our Hispanic players. And that a lot of times mom and dad didn't speak Spanish, and they didn't speak English. They only spoke Spanish. I have to work with that, but I need mom and dad on board, because I knew that's what I was doing. At the four-year school, when I was at Spring Hill College, mom and dad were looking for a private Jesuit college. I didn't have to convince mom and dad that this was the experience you're in. At the community college, I think having mom and dad and understanding what this experience can be for their student athlete, because if you get mom and dad's support in supporting that, what your mission is, then you're going to have a better coaching experience and a better team environment. So again, I think what you brought up, Tim, is about, we have these challenges and we're dealing with this and this and this and this, and it all seems negative what we're dealing with. I think as a community college coach, I need to rethink how I'm going to look at the experience, and what is the positive, and what can come out of a positive experience in being here. And when you change that culture, that's where you make the impact.
You mentioned that you've been coaching at a four-year college before. You've created a couple teams, and the structure and the resources are different to where you're at now. You're responsible for 2 teams. That's a lot of work, I can imagine. And also I wonder, Can you talk a little bit about the administration of that and the finances of that? Because I have a sneaking suspicion that your resources are a lot more limited where you are now as to where you would have been in a four-year institution. I've done some research with athletic directors in community colleges, and the biggest struggle is fundraising.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you do some of that? What are some of the challenges, but also things that you've learned along the way that have helped you succeed in this, where it's not just kind of a what do you need?
Right. Yeah. Yes, there are challenges from the financial standpoint, and I can go back to I've been able to I've run the different budgets, and so yeah, I'm still dealing with two separate budgets where I'm at right now. There are challenges in
Two
terms of
separate budgets. Do you mean men's and women's?
Yeah, so I have a women's budget and a men's budget. I still have some of those things, but when I took over as the coordinator of soccer initially, before I had the women's job with me, so initially it was men's soccer coach, then it was coordinator of soccer and men's soccer coach, and so I worked hand in hand with our women's coach, and then when our women's coach moved to a different position, that's when I transitioned into both. My initial thing was how can I leverage both programs together to help us.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. You as a coach, where can you find opportunities to leverage and collaborate with programs or whatever you need to do to maximize what your resources are going to be. So that's one of the things that I was doing. You bring up a great point about fundraising, because again, when you think about fundraising at the four-year program, a lot of times there's fundraising programs that are put together, and you've got a class of four classes of kids that you're working with. You get parents and grandparents and that get involved in some of that fundraising programs, and they're like it. We're in a 2-year program, and again, it's that quick turnaround, and you're not necessarily developing relationships from a fundraising standpoint, maybe the same way I did at the 4-year program, and what we're doing. What I've done that's been really intentional for me, from understanding my resources, I want to mentor younger coaches. So in terms of my coaching staff, I have a couple of more seasoned coaches, but I have some other coaches that are younger guys, like when I was 23 or 24, that they're doing club soccer, they're doing some high school soccer, and we're mentoring them. And I give them a lot of autonomy, and I give them the ability to experiment and do things. I set the guiding principles of what I want the program to be. I set some of the principles of if we're going to talk specifically soccer, I set some of the principles of play that I expect our teams to play and how we're going to play the game. But I allow them to have more ability to do some of the coaching, and I'm kind of now a master of puppets, that's not a great analogy because I don't consider them puppets, but I'm kind of overseeing what's happening, and I'm involved, but I'm giving them a lot of things. And come game day, I don't make a single decision game day without talking with my assistant coaches on what we're doing. My assistant coaches are part of everything I do. So I've built a coaching staff that believes the same values that I believe and understands what the value of our program is. And that helps us in terms of the experience that we're giving. I wish I could pay them more. I can't. We pay them what we're able to do, and realizing that I'm looking. Can I help one of these young coaches move to the next level, just like I'm helping my players move to the next level? And so it becomes more. Again, I've said it before. It's about we and not me. In terms of when we're coaching and working with these kids, I'm fortunate that I have a very supportive athletic director. She understands. We've had some great success with our women's program. Our women's program has been to the national tournament 6 times and won it 3 times in the last decade. So I think success helps.
Mm-hmm.
Our men's program for the first time was in the conference tournament, and then it hasn't been in 8 years. We had our first all-region player. We beat and competing on. We probably competed with one of the toughest schedules in the entire country, and who we competed with last year. And now we're starting to see that success that we had by changing the culture. It makes it easier. So I can't say that it not having had the women's program having success has helped. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I like your idea of consolidating both into, we have a soccer team, and
Right.
you know, as part of that, we have a men's team and a women's team, as opposed to you're over here, and you try and do your thing over here. We'll essentially try and get the same people involved over here, and then there's too much crossover. Can you give, just for those who may be interested in fundraising, can you give some examples of things that you've done in order to raise funds in the community college?
Sure. I'll give you the one at the University of Minnesota Morris, which was probably what I thought. I really loved the one we did at the University of Minnesota Morris, and it really ended up being one that at first my kids thought I was crazy, but once we got involved in doing it, they actually enjoyed it. I worked with our student affairs, and I worked with the school, and we were able to get the list of every single student on campus. Actually, every single student at the institution I was at. So in Minnesota Morris, we had approximately 2,000 students. So we got the mailing list of all 2,000 students and their parents. And we sent a letter home to their parents that we would deliver a birthday cake to their son or daughter on their birthday if they fill out a form. So the parents would fill out a form, send in a check for $15. And I was getting, it started off with maybe 25%, but we were averaging about 50% of the student body's parents were purchasing birthday cakes for their kids. I worked with the local bakery. The local bakery would make the cakes. They'd put the name on the kid's cake, and we would hand deliver a birthday cake to every single kid on campus of any parent that wanted it throughout the year. And you know what? We started getting parents, like after their fourth year, I'd have parents that would just send me $100 check for having done that for the 4 years for their kid. So that was one of the great ones that we did. I think sometimes you got to get creative. When I was at Spring Hill College, which I was a private Jesuit Catholic college, I was one of the most expensive schools in the area. I had the least amount of scholarship money of everyone. And I was in a very difficult conference where I was competing with teams that were competing in the national tournament and winning national championships on a regular basis. So the differences between the programs were like this. One of the things I did there from a fundraising standpoint, and you have to understand where you're at, if you can do it or not. We were able to do this at the time as an NAI school. We put on our own mini college showcases. So I targeted teams that I wanted to recruit from, and would bring them in for a 2-day tournament. And so I'd have 8 teams, club teams, or it could be, I was club teams that came into our campus for a mini tournament and a showcase. And then I would invite the local coaches around, which was, that's how I got the teams there. Local coaches were around, but we were fundraising from the entry fees. But more importantly, I had those 8 teams on my campus. So I was able to leverage my recruiting base by saying, yes, I was going to have these coaches all at this showcase, but you're on my. And now that I had them on my campus and seeing what we have, I was able to plant seeds as we could be a viable option for you to play. So not only did we raise money, but we did some fundraising through that experience. And then finally, for us is getting the kids involved. We always start off with we'd start off our season with doing what we call a daycare in the park, where we worked with the local McDonald's, and our soccer teams ran a full day event at the park for all the daycares in the town. But what we turn that into is we building those relationships with those families and with those daycares and with all those kids. When we hosted a 3-on-3 soccer tournament, who were the first ones to sign up? Because we had established relationships with the community, and then we would host a 3v3 soccer tournament, and that 3v3 soccer tournament would be, we want to go be part of that program and doing those small types of events. So all of our fundraising always starts with relationship building, right? Birthday cakes is about a relationship for the mom and dad. Daycare in the park leading to a environment where we're doing a 3v3 tournament. How can you build relationships? Because relationships lead to fundraising.
Great examples. Thank you for sharing. I want to turn a little bit to what you were talking about before, athletes of significance. I know that's a big passion of yours. So tell us a little bit about what that is and what you do within that.
Sure. Athletes of significance it's a concept that I came up with when as I shared with you, I stepped away from Spring Hill College at a point that I was able to do that and kind of take a break and grow myself and look at who I am as a coach, what am I going to do in terms of my own personal growth and where I was at and what was going to be the next phase in my life. And as I was going through that process, um, I started Volta, which is the main business, and through that concept, one of the things that I was always challenged with, and really, I'm going to backtrack for just a second. When I stepped away, when I went to my Facebook posts and everybody that was posting to Facebook, from my former players to the parents of my former players, not one of them talked about the championships we won. Not one of them talked about the All-Americans. Not one of them talked about the great seasons we had. Everyone was talking about the experiences they had, the lessons they learned, how they became better people, what I had players saying, Coach, I still remember when you talked about this and I still use it every day in my life. And it was really a light bulb went off in my head that everything I thought I was trying to do was actually being done. I just didn't realize it, because so often we're focused on results. We're focused on success. And in our world, we've been taught to win. In sports, it's about who's getting the best score and those types of things. And what I learned through that was that it was about the experiences they had that were so important. And so I started to focus on how can I address this idea of helping student athletes and families understand recruiting, and that recruiting is about relationships. As a college coach, I'm looking to build relationships. I was never looking to find the best player. I was always looking to find the right player for my program. And when I have the right players for my program, I can do magic. The same thing about recruiting. As an athlete, I shouldn't be trying to find the best soccer program to play at, which is so often the way that recruiting is approached. You need to be finding the right program for you to be playing at. And when you find the right program, you're going to be able to become the best version of yourself. And so what I saw through this process is that I saw a lot of things from the recruiting process I didn't like. And what I really believed is I thought that recruiting started with leadership first. And what type of leader am I going to be as a student? And how do I portray that to a coach? And how do I make that part of my experience? And how do I go about connecting with coaches and developing relationships with coaches so that I can find that right place for me, versus I'm just going to get you in front of as many coaches as I possibly can and let's see what happens. So as I was building all that, trying to figure all that out, I had a couple people tell me, well, what you're talking about is going to be difficult to do. So it comes down to this, Tim. I wanted to have a recruiting education platform that had sports leadership in it. I wanted to be scalable. I wanted to be affordable, and I wanted to be genuine and authentic from my experience as a coach. I wanted to pour into my experience as a coach. So I started to think about how to build that. And literally, I'm dead serious. I woke up in the middle of the night, straight up in bed. And in my head, it was athletes of significance. You want to focus on building athletes of significance, because coaches don't recruit success. They recruit significance. They are looking for the players that are going to bring the greatest value to their program. Talent is important, but it's not enough. And so that's, I mean, literally, it was that waking up in the middle of the night and writing that down in a journal that I started to build out this idea of athletes of significance and how do we work with that. And so it's about working with parents. It's about working with athletes. It's about working with coaches and really understanding what significance is, because once you experience significance, once you experience what I talked about on that Facebook post and what my players shared with me, the success no longer matters. Okay, the success, the wins and the losses are going to be there. The trophies are fantastic, but it's the relationships and the significance I had in my experience that make a difference in who I become and what I'm going to do with the next person I encounter. And so that's where AOS kind of came from. And now we've built that out until we have an online learning platform. We have within our online learning platform, different entry points, but we also give people access to interaction with coaches that have been doing this for a number of years. But then I also work with coaches in understanding how do you as a coach develop an athlete of significance? And what I really talk about when I'm talking with coaches, and if you don't mind me talking about this, because I think it's important for you and who you're dealing with and what you're trying to do, is I think coaches need to become what I call an athlete-centered coach. To coach an athlete of significance, you need to be an athlete-centered coach. And the athlete-centered coach is based off the principle, and I've designed this concept. When I was first going into coaching, they talked about 4 pillars of coaching. You've probably talked about this in your classes, or you've heard this concept of 4 pillars of coaching: technical, tactical, physical, psychological, right? Even when we talk about those 4 pillars, what is the one that is often left out? The psychological often doesn't get as much as it should. Mm-hmm. I really believe there are 8. I like to call it 8 prongs, because I think 8 prongs are focusing on the athlete and being athlete-centered. It is technical, it is tactical, it is physical, it is psychological. But I think there's also a social prong. Okay, how are you dealing? How are your athletes dealing in a social environment? How are they learning how to communicate? Are you focusing on that? Are you understanding the social environment that they're in? Where are they coming from? I have a first-generation Hispanic student versus a family that can afford a private Jesuit college of $50,000. They're 2 different social environments. How, as a coach, am I working with those particular kids? We need to understand the leadership piece. Are we intentional about developing leadership within the athletes? And I hear so many coaches talk about, why do you coach? Well, it develops life skills. Well, how are you developing them?
Work.
Yeah. So you have to be intentional about developing leadership skills. I think there's a spiritual component. Whether it's a faith-based spiritual or just understanding the why I do what I do. Why are kids wanting to play the sport? Where are they coming from an inner understanding of why they do what they do, and what is that spiritual piece that is there? And then finally, awareness. When I work and I'm aware of everything, and I'm aware of what my athletes are going through, and my athletes become more aware. Now, when I focus on all 8 of those, I'm focused on the athlete itself. Excuse me. So I go from being what I call an athletic-centered coach, where I'm coaching based on athleticism to get my results, to I become an athlete-centered coach, where I'm coaching to develop significance in my athletes.
I like the fact that you've added to those 4 pillars, and I think anybody watching now or in future needs to recognize that there's more to it than those 4 pillars, which are just fundamental to winning, right? And that's what most coaches focus on is let's develop the athlete so that we can get success out of the athlete, regardless of where they go on in life. What I find is a lot of coaches, as you kind of intimated, will say the right things, but then when you actually look at the way they coach, you then ask, how are they actually modeling those things or imparting those things into their athletes? And I think that's a big part that's missing is the difference between I know what I'm supposed to do versus here's how I'm actually building it into my program.
Great point.
Last question I want to ask is just looking for advice for coaches, not necessarily community college or college, could be high school, could be club, could be volunteer. What advice would you have for those who are wanting to get into coaching or maybe improve as coaches?
Never stop learning, right? Absolutely never stop learning. You always, I'm going on my 25th year of being a college coach, and I'm still learning. I go out to training sessions of, yes, I might going out to recruit, but a lot of times I'm actually watching the coach and how the coach is interacting and what he's doing in the training session and what can I pull from that. I think from a recruiting standpoint, it's important to do that. Being involved in trying to develop in your own self-leadership. How can I develop leaders if I'm not developing as a leader myself? And so it's important that we're always doing some form of self-leadership. Get in dialogue with other people. I think it's real important to have a mentor. I've had a couple of different mentors in my life, and my mentors, they come in different phases in my career, and they've always been mentors. And as I've developed different mentors in my career, there are times where an instance might come up that I actually need to go back to a mentor I haven't talked to for maybe 4 or 5 years, but I can ask them a question and go back, because we've had that relationship that we can speak to each other, and he can speak into what I'm going, and not be afraid to ask questions. I think it's so important as a coach. Don't be afraid to fail. Okay, only through failing and getting up from failing. As coaches, we live in a world where winning is what we're trying to do. I'm not gonna lie, I want to win. I'm not gonna lie. Winning is part of what I want. I want to have that success. But I know I'm going to have challenges and struggles, and what am I going to learn through those challenges and struggles? And then ask questions, always asking questions. And this is the other one that I think is so important when we go back to asking questions. Talk to your athletes and ask your athletes for feedback. Get feedback from them. Maybe they're bored to death with what you're doing, or they don't understand what they're doing, but they're too afraid to tell you because you're the coach and you know what's right. And so I actually ask my athletes. I mean, we do I have a post game interview that we do. We have it's a kind of a little survey sheet that do post game interview that they have to do and talk to me. And how did I feel before the game? How am I after the game? But even more importantly, what questions or concerns or comments do they have for me as coach that I can answer and deal with them? And it gives them that ability in a journaling aspect to share with me what's going on. And then it allows me to open up more dialogue with them. But you, as a coach, you've got to be willing to learn. You've got to be willing to fail. You've got to be willing to ask questions, and you've got to be focused on your own self-leadership.
Great advice. I would also add, asking athletes is a great thing to do. And you do it, I think, more frequently than most coaches who probably do an end of year evaluation or something like that. I think it needs to be done more often. I would also argue maybe have other people come in and observe you coach and provide feedback where it's not necessarily I have, as you talked about, a power difference, or I know Christian, so I'm going to come in and be really nice to him when when I provide my report to the athletic director, but more of an objective, this is what I saw. And I'm not providing an environment where it affects whether you get a raise or whether you have a job or any of that. It's here's what I saw. So I would also add that I think that could be a useful tool when it comes to evaluation. Christian, I know a lot of people watch these after we've done the interview. What's the best way for them to get in touch with you if they have any questions?
The best email address to use, get hold of me through email, is at christian@aossports.com. That's the email to the AOS Sports platform, and I'll definitely be willing to connect and contact anybody and chat with anybody. AOSsports.com is our website as well. And then also, I have another website, which is voltacoachsports.com, which is the leadership and when we're talking about the specific sports leadership and working with organizations and those types of things. But AOS Sports is where we're at right now and where we're really living. And you can check us out on Facebook. We have a Facebook page. We have a Facebook group. We're on Instagram. We're on Twitter. Everything's at AOS Sports.
Christian, thank you so much for joining me this morning. I appreciate your expertise and insight into your world and what advice you have for coaches. Of course, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel or Facebook or wherever, just to make sure that you do get notified when we do go live. Next week, athletic director in high school will be joining us to talk about his experiences in that environment. But on behalf of myself, Christian, thank you so much for joining us today. Tim Backers, Christian DeVries. We'll see you next time.